Are we getting more narcissistic over time? Spoiler alert, we're not. Let's look at why. But first of all, what is a narcissist exactly? A narcissist is someone who has a strong need for validation and admiration from other people. They basically want you to continually compliment them on how amazing, talented, attractive, intelligent they are. And they lack empathy, so they tend to be quite exploitative and manipulative. They don't recognize your own feelings or needs, so they're quite comfortable taking advantage of you for their own selfish benefit. There are two types of narcissists. Grandiose narcissists are the ones who seem loud, confident, and full of themselves. They come across as dominant and entitled. Vulnerable narcissists, on the other hand, seem like they're the opposite. They're insecure, easily hurt by criticism, and constantly need reassurance to feel okay. They might seem sensitive and caring, but deep down, they don't take responsibility for their actions, and instead see themselves as the victim. Hey, I like getting compliments. Am I a narcissist? Now, it's worth keeping in mind that many of us have narcissistic traits, such as loving it when people are giving us compliments, or enjoying being the center of attention. But having these traits doesn't necessarily mean that you're a narcissist. Narcissism is a spectrum, ranging from having certain narcissistic traits all the way to being clinically narcissistic. Are narcissists in love with themselves? We often think that they are, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Narcissists instead have fragile self-esteem, which is why they are constantly trying to get praise from other people. Think of it this way. If you truly loved yourself, then that would mean accepting yourself, which means that you wouldn't be obsessing over getting praise or compliments from other people. Interestingly, one theory about narcissists is that they have a self-esteem addiction. So when they're seeking external validation from other people, it's a bit like they're getting a self-esteem fix, similar to a drug addict seeking a drug-related fix. How is narcissism measured? In other words, if you wanted to know how narcissistic you are, what kinds of questions might you be asked? Typically, researchers use the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, NPI, as a self-report measure of narcissism. Now, if you really want to, you can do the test for free online. I've left a link in the description below. Basically, how it works is you're presented with all these statements that are shown in pairs, and for each pair, you have to select the statement that resonates with you the most. The test is used not just for measuring overall narcissism, but also 7 different components of narcissism, including authority, exhibitionism, superiority, vanity, exploitativeness, entitlement, and self-sufficiency. So, narcissism is not on the rise? This study looked at narcissism all over the world and over time, from 1982 to 2023. They did a meta-analysis, meaning that they looked at a lot of different studies on this topic. This resulted in a total of 1,105 studies being included in the analysis, and an overall sample size of approximately 550,000 participants. Overall, the researchers found that narcissism has actually been decreasing over time. This chart plots the average narcissism score for each study included in the analysis. The bigger the dot, the bigger the sample size. The more the dot is to the right side of the chart, the more recently the data were collected. And the higher the dot, the higher the average narcissism score. You can also see that each line represents a continent. North American countries, as in the US and Canada, are represented by the green line. And you can see that it's these countries that consistently have the highest scores for narcissism. Europe is the blue line, and you can see that their narcissism scores haven't really changed that much over time. Now, the really interesting thing about this chart is that it shows that globally, which is the yellow line, we've actually been getting less narcissistic over time. And when looking at the 7 different components of narcissism individually, they've been fairly stable over time. Superiority scores significantly decreased, and it was only entitlement and exploitativeness that have significantly increased over time. If you're wondering, Australia was included in the analysis, it's just not in the chart. The researchers reported that for Australians, there has also been a decrease in narcissism. So it seems a bit surprising that narcissism has been going down over time, considering smartphones and social media. Why might this be? One theory put forward by the researchers is that over time, as a society, we've been putting more emphasis on values such as inclusivity, diversity, acceptance, tolerance. maybe overall we've been becoming more empathetic and less self-centered. I've personally wondered whether it might be to do with a change in parenting styles over time. Okay, but what does parenting have to do with narcissism? So there are two theories on what causes narcissism, and both relate to parenting. The first one is parental coldness, when the parents are constantly cold and unloving towards the child. Understandably, this can be really painful for the child to process, so what the child might do is come up with this fantasy of them being incredibly important and special to help protect himself or herself from those really harsh feelings of being rejected by his parents. And consequently, the child might start seeking praise and admiration from other people to help confirm that he or she really is special and important. The second theory is the opposite. It's that the parents overly indulge the child in praise and compliments, especially the kind of praise that puts a label on the child, such as, wow, you're such a genius, or you're so talented, you're the most beautiful girl here. It's not just that this kind of praise encourages the child to think of himself or herself as being important, special, talented. It's also that it can lead to the child becoming dependent on, maybe even addicted to, getting this kind of praise from other people. In a way, around the 80s and 90s, one of the parenting trends was overpraising children. Parents essentially trying to boost their children's self-esteem. But now it's different. Now there's a lot more emphasis on trying to praise the effort rather than the reward. For example, rather than saying, wow, you're a genius, saying something like, it's so great to see that your hard work is paying off. By the way, in psychology, this is called a talent versus growth mindset. But keeping in mind, this is just my own personal theory. Okay, so we're not getting more narcissistic over time. Why does it seem like we are then? Well, the rise of smartphones, social media, selfies, insta models, influencers, kidfluencers, online self-promotion, sharenting, which is parents sharing every detail about their kids online, and for many of us, our obsession with trying to gain new followers and subscribers. But does social media actually make you more narcissistic over time? This is a study that investigated this. The researchers recruited a total of 74 participants who completed the NPI and a survey on problematic internet use. The students completed the surveys at the start of the study, so at baseline, and then at follow-up 4 months later. The researchers found that higher problematic internet use at the start of the study predicted an increase in narcissism 4 months later. But this was only the case for those people whose social media use was mostly visual, such as Instagram, selfies, image-based posting. It wasn't the case for those social media users whose use was more text-based, such as posting or commenting. So yes, this does provide some evidence that being highly active on social media, particularly with posting selfies and other visual self-centered content, can lead to you being more narcissistic over time. But it's worth noting that this study didn't report on specific components of narcissism. Is it possible that these social media users were becoming more narcissistic in some ways, but not necessarily in other ways? Maybe they became vainer and more exhibitionist, but not necessarily more authoritative or exploitative of other people. There is also that lonely people are more likely to be active social media users. And at this point in time, there are a lot of us feeling lonely. This study looked at loneliness from 2000 to 2019 across 113 different countries. This was a meta-analysis, so again, they looked at a lot of studies on this particular topic, and they reported that there are problematic levels of loneliness worldwide. In terms of whether loneliness has generally become more prevalent over time, the researchers reported mixed findings. In other words, it wasn't very clear. However, this study that was published in 2021 found that for young adults specifically, loneliness has been increasing since the 1970s. Now, why am I linking loneliness to narcissism exactly? As I said before, lonely people are more likely to be active users of social media. But what's even more worrying is that social media can lead to lonely people feeling even lonelier. This is a 9-year study with almost 7,000 Dutch adults. The researchers found that lonely people were more likely to use social media frequently over time. presumably as a way of connecting with other people, but it was also found that both passive and active social media use predicted these people experiencing even worse loneliness over time. This makes you wonder, of all those people who seem narcissistic online, how many of them are narcissists and how many of them are actually just lonely? Sometimes it's hard to tell. I personally think that a lot of them probably are just lonely, and this is probably why it is that we're not actually getting more narcissistic over time. We just seem like we are, thanks to social media. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.